I am so excited about what I see going on in the business world today with the entrepreneurs that I interface with at CEO Space. And those of you that have talked to me before know that I'm very passionate about cooperation, and that's what I see happening. And I want to talk a little bit about cooperation and why I'm excited about it. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Illinois, near Chicago. And I grew up in a middle-class family, single income, 7 kids, and we never had a lot of money when I was growing up. A lot of my friends, if they wanted to go to the movies, they would just say to their mom or their dad, "Hey, I want to go to the movies. Can I have some money?" If I'd ever said that to my dad, he would have just laughed his head off. And if I wanted to go to the movies, I had to come up with the money myself. And at the time I was a little annoyed by that, but now I'm really grateful because that is what drove me towards entrepreneurship. And I think I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, and I just didn't know it. The first entrepreneur experience that I remember was when I was about 8 years old, and it was a hot summer day, and school was out, and I was sitting on the porch with my best friend Joe Owens, and we were watching. We could see a door-to-door salesman coming down the street. You don't see them anymore, and I don't remember what he was selling, but I remember Joe and I were watching him as he got closer to our house. He'd walk up the sidewalk, knock on the door, talk for a few minutes, and he'd turn around, go down the sidewalk, come down to the next house, do the same thing. We were very curious as to what he was doing, and he finally got to our house, and he asked if my mom was there, so I went and got her. And then as she talked to him, Joe and I stood there wide-eyed watching him and listening to what he said. And I don't remember what he was selling, but I do remember that my mom didn't buy it. And so he left and went down the sidewalk, and as soon as he was gone, I turned to Joe and I said, "I can do that." All we needed was something to sell. And so we both ran home. I was already home, so I just ran into the kitchen and my mom wasn't there, and so I started going through the drawers. And in the bottom of one of the drawers, I found an old ice cream scoop that I thought, now she'll never miss this. And so when Joe came back, I said, "I've got something, let's go." So we started knocking on doors, and we were following this salesman down our street there and knocking on doors. And I knocked on the first door, and the lady came to the door, and I said, "We're selling this ice cream scoop. Would you like to buy it?" She said no. And so I went to the next door, and I thought, okay, I need to change my language a little bit. So I said, "Ma'am, we're selling this really wonderful ice cream scoop, and it's a real bargain. Would you like to buy it?" And she said no. And we continued down the street, and my language got better and better. We got to the corner. The salesman had crossed the street, but Joe and I weren't allowed to go off the block. So we turned the corner and started going down that side of the block. By the time we got around to the house that was directly behind my house, my language had gotten quite good. So I knocked on the door, and the lady of the house came to the door, and I said, "Ma'am, we're selling this ice cream scoop, and it is an excellent ice cream scoop. It's very sharp and will cut through the ice cream really well, so your hand won't get tired, and the handle fits really well in your hand." And then I noticed there was a hole in the back of kind of a hole, an opening in the handle, so that you could hang it on something. But I also thought it looked just the right shape, so I said to her, "And on the handle here is a bottle opener, so you can open up bottles and make root beer floats." And I can't remember what else I said about it, but she said to me all of a sudden, she said, "Well, how much do you want for it?" Well, no one had asked us this before, and so I was quickly thinking in my head, okay, 10 cents would mean a nickel for Joe and a nickel for me, and so I told her, "It's only 10 cents, ma'am." And she said, "Great, let me go get my purse." And she turned around and went into the house, and Joe and I were just grinning and dancing on the porch there, and she came out and gave me a dime. So Joe and I took our sales revenue, and we went down to the corner store. We could buy some penny candy, and as we were coming home eating our penny candy, we were talking about all of the money we were going to make as we now that we had developed this new skill. And just as we got close to my house, I could see my mom looking for me. She was standing on the back porch, and in her hand was an ice cream scoop. And apparently the lady across the alleyway from us had called her up as soon as we'd left, and she said, "Mrs. Hayward, I think I have your ice cream scoop." And I was worried that I was in a lot of trouble, and actually I didn't get in a lot of trouble. When I think back on it now, I think my mom must have thought it was pretty funny. But anyway, that was my first attempt at being an entrepreneur. I had many entrepreneurial experiences as I grew up. I mowed lawns, I delivered newspapers, I raked leaves, I walked dogs, I used to shovel walks, And I discovered that if I could find something that people needed done that I could do, I could exchange my labor I could exchange my service for income. And that's exactly what an entrepreneur does. I didn't know I was an entrepreneur. I just thought I was making money. I went off to college and continued to do the same thing. I started a carpet cleaning company. And I started a sign painting company. I got kicked off of campus because I was selling concessions there without permission, and I sold guitars out of my apartment. And eventually, I kept dropping out of school to try these ventures. And eventually, when I was 20, I went on a mission for my church for 2 years. I served as a volunteer in Japan. When I came back from my mission in Japan, I continued to be an entrepreneur, and I sold swimming pool alarms, among other things. I met my wife at college. We got married. I dropped out of school again and went back to Japan to be an entrepreneur there. I thought there were a lot of things I could do there. I started an English school, and I was actually doing quite well. But when I got to be about 26, I still hadn't graduated from college, and I really felt like I needed to. So I left my business there. I came back to school, and it took me 4 years. I pretty much had to start over again, and I finally graduated from school. Now, you're probably aware of this. I think most people are, but schools are not preparing you to be entrepreneurs. They're preparing you to be employees. And so I finally finished my degree at the ripe young age of 30, and went into the corporate world for the first time. And I got a job working in Bridgestone Corporation in Tokyo in their head office. And it was fun. I got a steady paycheck. I had benefits. I wore a suit and tie to work every day. And it was very competitive. And I'd never seen competition like this before. And frankly, I enjoyed it. And there were two types of competition. There was competition between our company and other companies, but there was competition within our company as well, as people competed for promotions and trying to get the attention and the praise of leadership. And I found I was good at it, and I enjoyed it. I was there for about 4 years. However, I did have a very much an entrepreneurial spirit. And when I look back on it, I realized that my manager gave me projects where I had a lot of autonomy, just because he realized that I performed better that way. So I left that position. I went back to the States, working for a consulting group, but I was really an independent consultant, so I was an entrepreneur again. But again, I was working in the corporate world. I was servicing companies like Honda and Toyota, very competitive. I enjoyed it a lot. And then I got invited by Heinz Corporation to go down to New Zealand for 2 years. Where I was working down there in a very, very, probably the most competitive environment I've ever been in, and the politics in that company were tremendous, and again I enjoyed it. I stayed there for 2 years. Wish I could have stayed longer. I really loved it there, and the company I was working for, Heinz, was a great company. But I finished my project, so they sent me packing. I came back to the U.S. and started a consulting company, this time completely on my own, but doing the same things I'd done before. And then in 2004, I heard about CEO Space for the first time. Now, frankly, when I first heard about CEO Space, it sounded way too good to be true. Especially they kept talking about cooperation, and I thought, no, that's just a gimmick. And it's kind of cute the way they're doing it, but I thought to myself, they'd never survive in the world I come from if they were always trying to cooperate. But I was fascinated by the education that was provided by CEO Space, and I decided to become a lifetime member. So I decided to join. I bought a lifetime membership, and I was off to my first forum. And the forums are big business growth conferences that CEO Space has 5 times a year. And at this time they were held in Las Vegas, and I went there, and I was planning on being there for about 7 days. And I went to my first day, and I went to the classes they had, and they were amazing. Exceeded my expectations. And towards the end of the day, after the classes were over, there was nothing else on the schedule, so I headed up to my room. But my brother, who was there with me and who had been to the forum before, he told me, no, he said, you need to come down and see what's going on. And so I went down to the lobby, and the members there had organized themselves into circles of about 8 to 10 chairs. And so I got in one of the circles to see what was going on. So they were going around the circle, and they would ask one member in the circle, so what are you doing and what do you need? And that person would then talk about what they needed, and everyone would try to help them. And I thought, well, that's really nice. And but I was sitting back kind of analyzing things. I wanted to see, what the people were like. There were CEOs there that were obviously had a lot of experience, and maybe some that were on their second or third company that they were building. And then there were others that were really just starting out and were still in a pre-revenue state. And then there were some that just had ideas on a napkin that they were coming and just really, really getting started with. As we were going around the circle, we got to a little lady that reminded me of my mom. And she pulled a handicraft out of her bag and started talking about her business. And I immediately realized she didn't have a business. And because she reminded me of my mom, I was a little bit concerned that people might be mean to her. I didn't want someone to say to her, now, you really don't have a business, so let's go on to the next person. But they didn't. As she started talking about her handicraft, everyone started helping her. Matter of fact, there were more people involved in giving her ideas than anyone else that had been in the circle. And some of the CEOs with the most experience were the ones that were giving her good ideas, and they were saying, do you know how you're going to monetize it? Well, have you thought about doing this? Do you know who your market is? Well, here's how you determine who your market is. And they started giving her ideas, and I watched this happen, and suddenly I started asking myself, why are they doing this? Because it didn't make sense in my world. In the competitive world that I'd come from, the best you could hope for was a win-win situation, but there was no win for these guys because she had no skills, she had no contacts, she had nothing that she could give back to them. They were simply trying to help her. And this was my first realization that cooperation was something that I wanted. And it really changed the way I looked at things. And I sat back and I analyzed myself, and I analyzed the way I did business, and I decided to do things differently. And so for the rest of that week, I tried to be a little bit more service-oriented, a little bit more cooperative. And frankly, I think it took me a while, may have taken me the better part of a year before I actually got to where I wanted to be. But the really amazing thing was, at the end of that week, that lady had turned her handicraft into a business. She had put together a team of people to help her, and she had figured out a revenue model for it. She determined who her market was, and actually, when she got done, it looked completely different than just the handicraft she'd pulled out of her bag. And that's the way cooperation works at CEO Space. So ever since that happened, I've been very involved in CEO Space. That was in 2004, so it's been almost 10 years now, and I rarely miss a forum. And I've gotten so much out of CEO Space, much, much more than I expected. But the thing I enjoy the most about going to the forum is not the help that I receive, but it's being part of that cooperation, helping other people and watch them succeed. About 3.5 years ago, the founder of CEO Space, Bernie Dorman, asked me if I'd be more active in my state of Utah and to help build up the state there and build up the club for the members that were there. At the time, we didn't have anybody there that was organizing things, so I told him yes, and I started doing that. And after about 3 years, I had Utah built up with a number of other club presidents that were running it. And I told Bernie, I said, Utah doesn't need me anymore. I'd like to do the same thing in Asia, and that's what I'm doing right now. And I'm not an employee of CEO Space. Right now, I'm not even getting my expenses covered. So you might wonder, well, why am I doing that? Right now I'm just wrapping up a trip where I visited Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and I'm in Manila and heading back tomorrow so that I can be at a CEO Space forum. And all the time I'm doing this, I'm running the businesses that I own. And so you might wonder why I'm doing this, and that's a question I want you to ask, because I want you to try and find out. There's a reason. I believe in cooperation. I believe that if we work together as entrepreneurs and business owners in cooperation instead of competition, that first of all, we'll have more success for ourselves. But second of all, we'll be able to bring the benefits to the world that we're trying to bring with our businesses. So I invite you to find out more about CEO Space. And I want to invite you to email me if you'd like some information about it. And I would love to tell you about CEO Space and about cooperation. My email address is very simple. It's CEO Space Utah, and that space is spelled out. CEO Space Utah, one word, at live.com, live.com. So if you'd like to find out about cooperation and about CEO Space, please send me an email. Thank you.